Nobody would hire the widow at the placement day. A cowboy with 8 children paid her full year. Osage Bend, Chalkley County, Nebraska, September 1893. The hiring bench outside the Osage Bend depot had held 11 women that morning. By 4 o'clock it held 1. Miranda Kirkendall was 39 years old, and she had been sitting on that bench since 7, with a carpet bag at her feet and a quart jar in her lap. The jar was the only thing she owned worth showing anybody. It held syrup, the color of a horse's eye held up to a lamp, clear amber, no cloud in it, no scorch. Her father had made it in Bledsoe County, Tennessee, in 1871, and she had carried it 700 miles on a prepaid ticket that was not a gift. It was a debt, $34 against 1 year of her labor, and if nobody signed for her by sundown, the Bureau would put her on the eastbound, and the $34 would follow her home like a dog. Mrs. Delphinia Yost, who ran the county placement day out of a folding table, had a kind face and a short pencil, and she had crossed off 10 names and could not cross off the 11th. "Nothing left but the Tennessee woman," she said, not unkindly, to the last farmer standing there. The farmer looked at Miranda the way a man looks at a wagon with a cracked axle, and he walked off toward the livery. Miranda did not stand up, and she did not cry. In the 4 years since her husband Ovid died, she had learned that standing up too soon made a woman look like she was begging. So she sat and turned the jar slowly in her hands and thought about saying the words I could not get placed out loud to a room in Tennessee that had already sold the syrup pans to pay the doctor. That is when the wagon came up the street with too many children in it. There were 8 of them, stacked in that wagon box like cordwood cut by somebody in a hurry. The man driving was Ransom Threadgill, 46, a Chalkley County cattleman with 160 acres of bottom cane and a face that had forgotten what it was for. His wife Docia had died 2 Octobers back, peacefully, in her own bed, of a fever that took 9 days. He had not hired help since, because every woman in the county who heard the number 8 said the number 8 back to him like an accusation. He had come at 3, which was late, because he had been fixing a mule's shoe, and because some part of him had known how it would go. Mrs. Yost gave him the short pencil and the long silence. "Mr. Threadgill, there's 1 left." "Then, I'll take everything that's left," he said. Mrs. Yost put the pencil down. "You haven't asked her name." "No, ma'am. I've asked 11 women their names in 2 years, and every one of them asked me a number back." He took his hat off, which was the first time that day anybody had, and he walked over to the bench. "Ma'am, I've got 8 children, from 15 down to 2. I've got a house that hasn't been swept right since Michaelmas, and a cane crop I can't turn into money. The Bureau wants $34 and a year's wage at 9 a month. That's $142, and I have got 191 in the world." Miranda looked at him a long moment. "You'd be giving me 3/4 of everything you have." "Yes, ma'am. For a housekeeper, you've never laid eyes on." Ransom looked at the jar in her lap, and something moved in his face for the first time in 2 years. "No, ma'am," he said, "for whoever made that." She turned the jar so the light came through it. "My father made that, but I know how." "Then you're worth every dollar I have," he said, "and I'd be a fool to argue myself out of it." He signed the bureau paper on the folding table, in front of God and Delphinia Yost and the 4 o'clock train, and he counted out the money in silver, because that is what a man had in that county in 1893. The Threadgill place sat in the bottoms where Sowbelly Creek bent east, and the children came off that wagon like water out of a bucket. Byram was 15, and had his father's shoulders and his mother's habit of standing between people. Amity was 13 and had been running the kitchen badly and knowing it, which is the hardest way to run a kitchen. Ephraim, F, was 11 and could name every mule in the county. Winifred, called Winna, was 9 and carried a slate everywhere and wrote on it more than she talked. Wesley was 8 and had eaten his supper standing up for 2 years because there had not been a chair with his name on it since his mother's funeral, when the chairs got rearranged and nobody rearranged them back. Perny was 6, Rual was 4, Effie was 2, and she was asleep against Byram's collarbone before the wagon crossed the ford. Mirinda took the house in one long look, the flour scoop left in the barrel, the milk pans stacked wet, the good dishes put high where nobody could reach them, which is what a house does when it decides the woman is not coming back. She did not reorganize a single thing that first night. She made cornbread, and she set 9 places at the table. Wesley stood behind his chair with his hands on the back of it and did not sit. "Sit down," Mirinda said. I counted. He sat. Amity turned her face toward the window very fast and kept it there a while. The cane was the trouble, and it took Mirinda 4 days to understand how bad. Ransom Threadgill ran cattle, but cattle in Chalkley County in 1893 were worth what the panic said they were worth, which was very little, and the bank at Ridgewater held a note for $410 coming due the 1st of December. What he had that could still make money was 22 acres of sorghum cane, standing 8 feet high in the creek bottom, and a mule sweep mill and a flat evaporator pan that had come with the place. And the syrup he made was terrible. It came off dark as harness leather, bitter at the back of the tongue, and sold, when it sold, at 18 cents a gallon to a jobber who blended it into something else and never said what. Everybody in the bottoms made syrup that way. Mirinda walked the cane rows on the 4th morning with F and a cane knife, and she chewed a joint of stalk, and she went and looked at the flat pan for a long time, and then she went and looked at the skimming. "Where do you put the skimmings?" she asked. "Back in," Ransom said. "You lose half your gallonage otherwise." "You lose half your gallonage anyway," she said. "It's going out the door at 18 cents. My father sold at 60. Ransom sat down on the mill frame. She told him what she knew, and she told it plain, the way her father had said it over a pan in Tennessee. Green cane makes a bitter syrup, so you strip and cut and you grind within the day. Skimmings are not syrup. They are what the syrup is trying to get rid of, and if you stir them back in, you have made a barrel of your own mistakes. And a flat pan is a pan where the fresh juice and the finished syrup live in the same water, so the finished half scorches while the fresh half catches up. So what does a man do about the pan? He doesn't use a flat one, she said. He makes the juice walk. Here is the part that made it hard. The only continuous flow evaporator pan that had ever been built in Chalkley County had been built by Alpheus Gundlach in 1881, and Alpheus Gundlach was 58 years old and owned the Ridgewater Syrup Works and held the county contract, and he had been the second man to look Mirinda Kirkendall over on the hiring bench and the first one to say something out loud about it. The pan had failed in its first season. Partitions warped, gates stuck, 400 gallons sugared up in the bends, and the Ridgewater Beacon had printed a paragraph about it with the word contraption in it. Gundlach hauled it behind the works and let the weather have it, and for 12 years he made dark syrup with a flat pan like everybody else and never spoke of the other thing again. Every boy in the county knew where it lay. It was the local monument to what happens to a man who tries something. They went and asked for it. Gundlach came out to the yard with his sleeves rolled and looked at Ransom, and then at the woman standing beside him with her hands folded, and he said, in front of 2 of his own hired men, You may have the scrap. I have no use for it and no use for her, and I said so on Tuesday and I'll say it Friday. Miranda said, "Thank you for the pan, Mr. Gundlach," and nothing else, and Ransom got it on the wagon before he said anything he could not take back. It took 19 days. Miranda and Byram and F got the pan down to bare iron and found what nobody had bothered to find in 1881. The partitions had not been the mistake. The slope had been the mistake. Gundlach had built the thing dead level, so the juice had to be pushed through the bends instead of walking down them, and where it stopped, it sugared, and where it sugared, it stuck. They set it on blocks with 1.25 inches of fall from head to foot, and Miranda cut new gates out of sheet tin with a cold chisel and a hammer and Winna's slate for a straight edge. Then she reorganized the whole yard around the pan, because that is what she actually was, not a cook, a maker, and everybody found out at once. Byram drove the mule sweep and nothing else, because a sweep that stops for 10 minutes puts stale juice in the head of the pan. F and 2 neighbor boys stripped and cut, and nothing was ground that had stood overnight. Amity ran the settling barrels, 3 of them in a row, so the juice was clean before it ever saw fire. Winna kept the skimming. She stood at the head of the pan with a long-handled tin skimmer and a bucket, and every skim went in the bucket, and the bucket went to the hogs, and she wrote the number of buckets on her slate, and that slate is the thing that ended up in a museum. Wesley kept the fires. Perny and Reuel carried the dipper. Effie sat in a crate where 3 people could see her, and Miranda stood at the foot of the pan with a wooden paddle and did the only thing that cannot be written down, which is know when. The first syrup came off the foot gate on the 29th of September at 4:15 in the afternoon, and Ransom Threadgill held a tin cup of it up against the sky, and it was clear amber, and you could see the mule through it. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Wesley said, "It's the same as the jar," and that is when Amity had to go behind the crib. They made 940 gallons before the first hard freeze. It went at 52 cents a gallon, and not to a jobber. It went to the grocers at Ridgewater and Chalkley Center, and, by the middle of November, to a wholesale house in Lincoln that sent a man out to look at the pan and stayed for supper and had to be told twice that the woman running the yard was the housekeeper. $488.80. The December note was paid on the 21st of November with $178 left over, and Ransom Threadgill sat at his own table that night with 8 children and a hired woman and did not know where to put his hands. He told her the thing then because there was no more work standing between them. "Docia asked me for help," he said, in the fall of '91. "Asked me to hire a girl through the syrup season, and I said the cane wouldn't pay for it." He turned his cup around. She made 40 gallons alone that October, every bit of it dark. And she was thin as a rail by the time the fever came, and the doctor said the fever was the fever and it wasn't the work, and I have never once believed him. Miranda did not tell him it wasn't his fault, because that is a thing people say to make themselves feel better. She said, "Then she's the reason there's a chair for Wesley." The county fair at Chalkley Center was the second week of the next September, and by then everybody in 3 counties knew what was coming out of the Threadgill bottoms, and everybody knew whose money and whose name it had been made against. Ransom expected her to say it. He half wanted her to. Gundlach had blackballed her at the bureau in writing. Ransom had found that out in July from Delphinia Yost's own letter book, a note over Gundlach's signature dated the day before the placement day, advising the Bureau that the Tennessee applicant was not suited to a household in this county and ought to be returned east. Miranda read it once, then she carried it out to the syrup furnace and put it in the fire, and she copied nothing, and she told nobody, and it was 31 years before anyone alive besides her knew the letter had existed. What she did at the fair was this. She had the pan hauled in on the wagon and set on blocks in the exhibition shed with 1.25 inches of fall, and she had Byram letter a board and nail it to the head of it, and the board read, "Continuous pan, designed by Alpheus Gundlach, Ridgewater, 1881, rebuilt on the slope." The design was right. We only set it level. And when the judges gave the sweepstakes ribbon on syrup to the Threadgill place, Marinda Kirkendall stood up in front of 400 people and said, out loud, that she had made nothing. She had found a pan behind a man's works that he had built 12 years ago when there was nobody in the county to build it with him, and every gallon in that jar had come off the iron he cut. Alpheus Gundlach was standing at the back of the shed. He had come to see the woman he had written the letter about get a ribbon. He did not say anything that day. He went home and he sat up all night, and in the morning he hitched his own team and drove out to Osage Bend and stood in the Threadgill yard with his hat in both hands, which for a man of 58 in Nebraska in 1894 was the same as lying down in the road. "They printed the word contraption," he said. "In 1881, I was 46. He looked at the mill. "I have made bad syrup for 12 years on purpose, ma'am, so nobody could print it twice." "It wasn't a contraption," Marinda said. "It was 1.25 inches." Gundlach nodded slowly, and then he said, "Would you show me?" She showed him. It took the better part of a day and the whole of the next season. The Ridgewater Syrup Works went over to sloped continuous pans in the fall of 1894 and put Gundlach and Threadgill on a paper label, and by 1899 there were 61 of those pans between the Platte and the Kansas line, and the Chalkley County syrup that had gone at 18 cents to a jobber was going at better than 50 to grocery houses in 3 states. Gundlach never took a royalty and never let anybody call it anything but the Gundlach pan. He ate Sunday dinner at the Threadgill table for 19 years, and he died peacefully at 79 in 1914, and he left his half of the label to Winna, who by then was 30 and ran the works. Ransom Threadgill asked Marinda Kirkendall to marry him in October of 1894, badly, at the foot of the pan, with syrup on both his hands. He said he had $178 and a note paid, and 8 children, and no argument to make except that the house had been quiet for 2 years, and it was not quiet anymore. She said, "You already paid every dollar you had once. I'm not going to make you do it twice." They were married, the 9th of November. She was 40, he was 47. Amity married a Ridgewater man and named her first girl Docia, and asked first, and Ransom had to go stand in the yard. Byram took the home place. F went to the agricultural school on syrup money and came back a county extension man. Winna ran the works. Wesley kept a chair at his own table for whoever came, all his life, and told people why. Marinda died peacefully in 1931, at 77, in the room with the window over the cane bottom. In the summer of 1939, the Chalkley County Historical Society opened a case in the old Ridgewater Depot, and Effie Threadgill Amsden, who was 48 and had been the baby in the crate, put 2 things in it. One was a child's slate with a column of figures on it in a 9-year-old's hand, and the figures were buckets of skimmings, and at the bottom somebody had written, "None put back." The other was a quart jar of syrup made in Bledsoe County, Tennessee, in 1871, never opened, still clear. A young reporter asked her what the jar was worth. Effie thought about it. $142, she said. He counted it out on a folding table in front of the whole town, and there wasn't a soul there who thought he was getting his money's worth. She closed the case. "He got it," she said, "by about 1,000 gallons.